The morning mist clung to the Oklahoma plains like a shroud, rolling across endless grassland where the only sound was the rhythmic creaking of an old windmill. Its weathered blades turned slowly against the pewter sky, a lonely sentinel that had witnessed decades of sunrise and sorrow. But on this particular dawn, something extraordinary waited beneath its shadow. Jake Bennett had ridden this stretch of rangeland every morning for the past 12 years, checking fence lines and counting cattle for the sprawling Triple Crown ranch. At 34, he moved with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle, his weathered hands steady on the reins as his chestnut mare, Copper, picked her way through the tall prairie grass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The windmill had always been a landmark on his route, nothing more than a rusty old structure that pumped water for the cattle tanks. Today, everything changed. As Copper crested the small rise that led to the windmill, Jake pulled up short, his breath catching in his throat. There, curled against the stone foundation of the old structure, was a sight that defied belief. A young woman lay sleeping, her dark hair fanned across a tattered blanket, and nestled against her were 3 small bundles that could only be babies. But what made Jake's heart skip a beat was the 4th creature in that impossible tableau, a small red fox kid, no bigger than his fist, curled up between the woman and her children like a guardian angel with russet fur. Jake sat frozen in his saddle, hardly daring to breathe as he took in the scene before him. The woman couldn't have been more than 25, her clothes dusty and worn, suggesting she'd been traveling for days. Her face, even in sleep, bore the lines of exhaustion and worry that spoke of hardships too heavy for someone so young. The 3 babies, wrapped in what looked like torn pieces of clothing and a thin hospital blanket, slept peacefully despite the morning chill that made Jake pull his jacket tighter around his shoulders. But it was the fox kit that held his attention. The tiny creature should have been terrified of human scent, should have fled at the first sign of danger. Instead, it lay with complete trust against the woman's side, its small body rising and falling with each breath, occasionally letting out the softest of chirps that sounded almost like contentment. In all his years working the land, Jake had never seen anything like it. Copper shifted beneath him, and the slight jingle of her bridle caused the woman's eyes to flutter open. They were the color of deep water, blue-green like the old swimming hole down by Cotton Creek, and filled with a wariness that spoke of too many betrayals. She sat up slowly, instinctively pulling the babies closer to her chest, while the fox kit merely stretched and settled more comfortably against her hip. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "We're not causing any trouble. We'll move on." Jake dismounted carefully, his boots crunching softly on the dried grass as he approached with his hands visible and empty. He'd dealt with plenty of spooked animals in his time, and right now this young mother reminded him of a doe caught in an open field, ready to bolt at the first sign of threat. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying the gentle drawl that marked him as a son of the Oklahoma soil, "I'm not here to run you off. Name's Jake Bennett. I work for the ranch that owns this land." He gestured toward the vast expanse of rolling prairie that stretched to the horizon. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The woman studied his face, searching for deception or malice, finding neither. Jake had the kind of honest features that his grandmother used to say were carved from good oak. Strong jawline, steady brown eyes that held no guile, and hands that spoke of honest work. His clothes were worn but clean, his boots scuffed from years of use but well-maintained. Everything about him suggested reliability, but the woman had learned not to trust appearances. "I'm Emma," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma Rodriguez. These are my children." She looked down at the 3 small faces that were beginning to stir with the morning light. "Sophia, Miguel, and Anna. Triplets." The word came out with a mixture of pride and exhaustion that made Jake's chest tighten with sympathy. "Triplets," he repeated softly, wonder creeping into his voice. That's something special." His eyes moved to the fox kit, which had opened its bright amber eyes and was watching him with curious intelligence. "And your friend here?" Emma's hand moved protectively to the small creature, her fingers gently stroking its russet fur. "I found him 3 days ago, when we were walking through the woods near Broken Bow. His mother had been hit by a car, and he was crying beside her body." Her voice broke slightly at the memory. "I couldn't just leave him there. He's been with us ever since. Jake nodded, understanding flickering in his expression. Anyone who would risk their own safety to rescue an orphaned animal was someone worth knowing. What are you calling him? Rusty, Emma said, and for the first time, Jake caught a glimpse of a smile at the corners of her mouth. He likes to sleep curled up with the babies. Keeps them warm. The practical part of Jake's mind was already calculating distances and resources. The nearest town was Millfield, 15 miles to the south, and from the look of Emma's clothes and the makeshift bedding, she'd been traveling on foot for days. The babies couldn't be more than a few months old, and the thought of this young mother walking across the harsh Oklahoma landscape with 3 infants and an injured fox kit made something fierce and protective rise in his chest. Emma, he said carefully, how long have you been out here? She was quiet for a long moment, her attention focused on the babies, who were beginning to wake up properly, making soft mewling sounds that spoke of hunger and discomfort. We left Tulsa 6 days ago, she admitted finally. Been walking mostly at night, sleeping during the day when we could find shelter. 6 days. Jake's jaw tightened as he thought about the dangers she'd faced. Wild animals, exposure, lack of food and water. Not to mention traveling with 3 infants who needed constant care. What happened in Tulsa? If you don't mind my asking. Emma's face closed off, the brief openness disappearing like water soaking into parched earth. Lost my job when I couldn't find reliable childcare for 3 babies. Landlord evicted us when I couldn't make rent. The shelter was full and the waiting list. She shrugged, trying to make it sound casual, but Jake could hear the pain underneath. Sometimes you just have to make your own way. It was a story Jake had heard variations of before, especially since the economic downturn had hit rural Oklahoma hard, young families struggling to make ends meet, falling through the cracks of a system that wasn't designed to handle the complexities of real life. But hearing it from this exhausted young mother, sitting in the shadow of an old windmill with 3 babies and a fox kit, made it real in a way that newspaper articles never could. One of the babies, little Sophia, from what Jake could tell by the tiny pink bow someone had tied in her wispy dark hair, began to cry in earnest. Emma immediately shifted her into a feeding position, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes when no milk came. She was dehydrated and undernourished, her body unable to provide what her children desperately needed. When did you last eat? Jake asked gently. Emma's silence was answer enough. Jake made a decision that would change all their lives, though he didn't know it yet. Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know there's no wrong answer. But I work for people who might be able to help you and the babies. The thing is, they're particular about who they invite onto their land. They've got their own way of judging character. Emma looked up at him, wariness creeping back into her expression. What kind of judgment? Jake glanced at Rusty, who had climbed onto Emma's shoulder and was chittering softly at the approaching horse. Copper had wandered closer during their conversation, drawn by curiosity and the scent of the unusual little family. Most wild animals would have panicked at the sight of such a large predator, but Rusty seemed completely unafraid. The family I work for, they believe animals are better judges of character than most people, Jake explained. They've got a saying about trust being something you can't fake, only earn. If you're willing, I'd like to take you up to the main house, let you meet them. But first, there's something I need to see. Emma frowned, clutching her babies closer. What do you mean? Jake pointed toward a small structure about 50 yards away that Emma hadn't noticed in her exhaustion the night before. It was a chicken coop, old but well-maintained, with a small fenced yard where a dozen hens pecked at the morning feed. The owner of this ranch, Mrs. Catherine Walsh, she's got a theory about trust. Says if a creature that's known nothing but wildness can learn to trust the most vulnerable things on a farm, then that creature, and the person caring for it, has something special. Emma followed his gaze to the chicken coop, confusion evident on her face. I don't understand. Chickens are prey animals, Jake explained patiently. They're afraid of everything, especially predators like foxes. But Mrs. Walsh believes that genuine trust, the kind that comes from a pure heart, can overcome even the deepest instincts. She's seen it happen before, though not often. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The implication slowly dawned on Emma. You want to see if Rusty will approach the chickens without frightening them. I want to see if they'll accept him, Jake corrected. There's a difference. One is about the fox's behavior, the other is about recognition of something deeper. Emma looked down at the small fox kit perched on her shoulder, his bright eyes alert and curious as he watched the chickens in the distance. She had seen his gentle nature with her babies, the way he seemed to understand their needs and vulnerabilities. But this was asking something different, something that went against millions of years of evolutionary programming. What happens if they don't accept him? She asked quietly. Jake met her gaze steadily. Then I'll take you into town, help you connect with social services, make sure you and the babies get the help you need. But if they do accept him... He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Mrs. Walsh doesn't just own this ranch, Emma. She's got a heart for people who've been dealt a rough hand, especially mothers with children. She's helped a lot of folks get back on their feet, but she's also been taken advantage of more times than she cares to count. The animal test, it's her way of seeing past the surface. Emma felt a flutter of hope mixed with terror. The possibility of real help, of a chance to provide for her children, was almost too much to contemplate. But the risk of failure, of being turned away again, made her stomach clench with anxiety. Sophia's cries were growing more urgent, soon joined by her siblings as their morning hunger made itself known. Emma rocked them gently, but she knew they needed more than comfort. They needed food, warmth, medical attention, all the things she'd been unable to provide during their desperate flight from Tulsa. Okay, she whispered, the word barely audible over the sound of the creaking windmill. We'll try. Jake nodded, understanding the courage that simple word represented. I'll help you up. We'll take it slow. Getting Emma and the babies to their feet was a careful process. She'd been sleeping on the hard ground for days, and her body protested every movement. Jake found himself steadying her elbow as she swayed slightly, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands shook with exhaustion. Rusty remained perched on her shoulder throughout the process, his small claws gentle on her worn jacket. He seemed to sense the importance of the moment, his usually playful demeanor replaced by an alert stillness that made him seem older than his few weeks of life. The walk to the chicken coop felt endless, though it couldn't have been more than 100 yards. Emma's legs trembled with each step, and Jake found himself slowing his pace to match hers, ready to catch her if she stumbled. Copper followed behind them, her reins trailing in the grass, completely unbothered by the strange procession. As they approached the fence, the chickens began to take notice. A few of the hens looked up from their pecking, heads tilting with the characteristic jerky movements of their kind. One large Rhode Island red, clearly the flock's matriarch, stepped forward with the confident swagger of a bird who'd established her place in the pecking order through years of vigilance. That's Henrietta, Jake said softly, nodding toward the red hen. She's the boss of this outfit. If anyone's going to sound the alarm, it'll be her. Emma felt Rusty tense on her shoulder as the scent of the chickens reached him. Every instinct the kit possessed should have been screaming at him to hunt, to see these feathered creatures as prey. Instead, she felt him settle more securely against her neck, his small body warm and trusting. What do I do? Emma whispered. Just be yourself, Jake replied. Let Rusty decide how he wants to handle this. Emma approached the fence slowly, her babies quiet in her arms as if they too sensed the significance of the moment. The chickens watched her approach with varying degrees of interest and wariness. Henrietta stepped closer to the fence, her bright eyes fixed on the small fox kit perched on the stranger's shoulder. For a long moment, nothing happened. The morning air was filled with the sound of the windmill's creaking, the distant lowing of cattle, and the soft cooing of the babies. Emma held her breath, afraid to move, afraid to hope. Then Rusty did something extraordinary. Instead of jumping down to investigate the chickens at ground level, where his presence would be most threatening, he climbed down Emma's arm and settled in the crook of her elbow, positioning himself at the baby's level. From there, he let out a soft chirping sound, almost like a greeting. Henrietta cocked her head, studying the fox kit with the intense focus of a creature whose survival had always depended on reading threats accurately. The other chickens gathered behind her, a feathered tribunal passing judgment on this unusual visitor. Emma felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the silent communication taking place. Rusty remained perfectly still, his amber eyes bright but non-threatening, his body language speaking of curiosity rather than predation. The babies, sensing their mother's tension, remained unusually quiet, their large, dark eyes moving between the chickens and their unlikely protector. What happened next would be talked about on the Triple Crown Ranch for years to come. Henrietta stepped forward to the fence line, her head low in the posture chickens used when investigating something new. Instead of the aggressive squawking that usually greeted potential threats, she made a soft clucking sound, almost conversational in its tone. Rusty responded with another gentle chirp, and then, to Emma's amazement, he carefully extracted himself from her arms and approached the fence. Not with the stalking crouch of a predator, but with the curious waddle of a young animal seeking friendship. The two species faced each other through the wire mesh, separated by millions of years of evolutionary programming that said they should be enemies. Henrietta extended her neck, bringing her head close to the fence, while Rusty sat back on his haunches and tilted his head in the universal gesture of harmless curiosity. Then Henrietta did something that made Jake suck in a sharp breath of amazement. She began to preen, the ultimate chicken gesture of relaxation and trust. One by one, the other hens followed suit, their initial wariness dissolving into acceptance. Jake had seen Mrs. Walsh's animal test performed dozens of times over the years. He'd watched as nervous dogs were rejected by the ranch's horses, as aggressive cats sent the chickens into hysterics, as troubled teenagers' pets revealed their owners' hidden anger through their behavior. But he'd never seen anything like this, a wild fox kit being welcomed into the flock's circle of trust as if he belonged there. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Emma sank to her knees in the grass, overwhelmed by exhaustion and hope in equal measure. The babies began to fuss again, their hunger becoming impossible to ignore, but she could barely process their needs through the fog of relief and disbelief. "Does this mean—" she began, but couldn't finish the question. Jake knelt beside her, his weathered hands gentle as he helped support the babies. "Emma Rodriguez, I think you and your children just passed the hardest test on the Triple Crown Ranch. Mrs. Walsh is going to want to meet you, and when she hears about this—" He gestured toward Rusty, who was now lying contentedly by the fence while Henrietta and her flock pecked at bugs nearby, completely unconcerned by his presence. "When she hears about this, she's going to know you're something special." Emma felt the first genuine smile she'd experienced in months creep across her face. It was tentative, fragile as a butterfly's wing, but real. "What happens now?" Jake stood and whistled sharply. Copper raised her head from the grass where she'd been grazing and trotted over, her reins trailing. "Now we get you and these babies up to the house. Get some food in you, and let Mrs. Walsh work her magic. But first—" He paused, his expression growing serious. "I need to warn you about something. The Walsh family, they're good people, the best I've ever known. But they've been hurt before by folks who took advantage of their kindness. They'll help you, I'm sure of that now, but they'll expect honesty in return. No matter how bad your story gets, no matter what you're running from, they'll need to hear the truth." Emma's smile faltered slightly as old fears reasserted themselves. The truth was complicated, messy, filled with mistakes and poor choices that had led her to that windmill with 3 babies and no hope. But, looking at Rusty, still peacefully coexisting with creatures that should have been his natural prey, she felt something shift inside her chest. "I understand," she said quietly. "After what just happened, I think I'm ready to trust again too." Jake helped her to her feet, noting how she swayed slightly with exhaustion. The babies were crying in earnest now, their small faces red with hunger and discomfort. They needed immediate attention, and Jake knew that Mrs. Walsh would want to help regardless of the circumstances. "Can you ride?" he asked, assessing Emma's condition with the practical eye of someone who'd dealt with his share of emergencies. Emma looked at Copper doubtfully. The mare was beautiful but large, and Emma hadn't been on a horse since childhood. "I don't think so. Not with the babies." Jake nodded, already formulating an alternative plan. "Copper's gentle as a lamb, but you're right to be cautious. The house isn't far. maybe a mile through that grove of cottonwoods. He pointed toward a cluster of trees that marked the presence of a creek. Think you can walk that far? Emma looked down at her children, their small faces scrunched with discomfort, then at Rusty, who had finally left his post by the chicken coop and was climbing back up her leg to his preferred perch on her shoulder. The fox kit seemed to understand they were moving again, settling himself securely for the journey ahead. "I can make it," she said, and Jake heard the determination that had carried her across the Oklahoma plains with 3 babies and a fox kit. Whatever had happened to Emma Rodriguez in Tulsa, whatever had driven her to flee into the wilderness with her children, she was a fighter. The evidence was sitting on her shoulder, chittering softly at the passing breeze. They began walking toward the cottonwoods, Jake leading Copper by the reins while keeping a careful eye on Emma's progress. She moved slowly but steadily, pausing occasionally to shift the baby's weight or murmur words of comfort when they fussed. Rusty remained alert on her shoulder, his bright eyes scanning their surroundings with the instinctive wariness of a wild creature, but his body language remained relaxed and trusting. As they walked, Jake found himself studying this unexpected addition to his morning routine. Emma Rodriguez was clearly educated. Her speech patterns and vocabulary suggested more than a high school education, though her clothes and circumstances told a different story. The babies were well cared for despite their obvious hunger, clean and dressed in clothes that had been mended with careful stitches. Even Rusty showed signs of gentle handling, his fur glossy and his small body unmarked by neglect or abuse. "Can I ask what you did in Tulsa?" Jake said as they entered the shade of the cottonwoods. The temperature dropped noticeably under the canopy of leaves, and Emma visibly relaxed in the cooler air. "I was a veterinary technician," Emma replied, her voice carrying a note of pride despite everything. "Worked at a clinic in downtown Tulsa for 3 years before." She gestured vaguely at the babies. "Before life got complicated." "That," explained Rusty. Jake realized. Emma's training would have given her the knowledge to care for an orphaned fox kit, to recognize signs of injury or illness that most people would miss. It also explained the gentle confidence she showed with the small creature, the way she seemed to understand his needs without conscious thought. "Must have been good work," Jake observed. "Animals need advocates." "I loved it," Emma said simply. "Every day was different, helping creatures that couldn't speak for themselves. Dr. Martinez used to say I had a gift for reading animal behavior, for understanding what they needed even when they couldn't communicate it clearly." Jake filed that information away, knowing it would matter to Mrs. Walsh. The ranch owner had a deep respect for people who worked with animals, especially those who chose to help rather than exploit. Emma's background would count heavily in her favor when the time came for difficult conversations about her future. They paused at the creek that ran through the cottonwood grove, the sound of running water, a welcome relief after the dusty silence of the plains. Emma knelt carefully by the bank, cupping water in her hands to drink deeply, while balancing the babies against her knees. Jake unsaddled Copper and let the mare drink her fill, the peaceful moment giving all of them a chance to rest. Rusty climbed down from Emma's shoulder and lapped delicately at the water's edge, his pink tongue darting out in quick, efficient movements. The babies watched him with fascination, their crying subsiding as they became absorbed in observing their unusual companion. "He's remarkable," Jake said, watching the fox kit's graceful movements. "I've never seen wild animal behavior like that. Most foxes his age would be terrified of humans, let alone comfortable enough to travel with a family." Emma smiled, the expression transforming her tired features. "He chose us, really. When I found him by his mother's body, he was crying so pitifully. I couldn't leave him there, but I expected him to run away as soon as he recovered from the shock. Instead, he followed us. Started sleeping with the babies that first night, keeping them warm when I couldn't get a fire started safely." "What made you decide to keep him?" Emma was quiet for a moment, her fingers trailing in the cool creek water. "The night before we left Tulsa, I was sitting in our empty apartment with the babies, trying to figure out what to do next. We had nowhere to go, no money, no prospects. I was seriously considering." She swallowed hard, unable to voice the desperate thoughts that had plagued her darkest moments. Jake waited patiently, recognizing the signs of someone working up the courage to share something painful. "Rusty climbed into my lap that night and just sat there, purring like a cat. Not making demands, not adding to my problems, just offering comfort. It was the first time in months that I felt like I wasn't completely alone in the world. Whatever happened next, at least I had one creature who chose to stay with me. The simple honesty of the statement hit Jake harder than any dramatic declaration could have. Here was a young mother who'd been abandoned by the adults in her life, left to care for 3 infants with no support system, yet she'd found room in her heart and her desperate circumstances to rescue a wild creature that needed her. The character it revealed was exactly what Mrs. Walsh looked for in the people she chose to help. They resumed their walk toward the ranch house following a well-worn path that wound through the cottonwoods toward higher ground. As they climbed the gentle slope that led out of the creek bottom, Jake began pointing out landmarks and explaining the layout of the Triple Crown Ranch. Mrs. Walsh inherited this place from her husband 5 years ago, he said, gesturing toward the vast expanse of grassland that stretched in all directions. Thomas Walsh built it from nothing, starting with 100 acres and a handful of cattle back in the 1980s. By the time he passed, it was one of the most successful operations in eastern Oklahoma. Emma listened while managing the increasingly fussy babies, Rusty providing a welcome distraction as he chittered at passing birds from his perch on her shoulder. "What's she like, Mrs. Walsh?" Jake considered the question carefully. Catherine Walsh was a complex woman, shaped by loss and hardship, but refusing to let those experiences make her bitter. "She's fair," he said finally. "Tough when she needs to be, but fair. Lost her husband to cancer 3 years back, never had children of her own. Since then, she's kind of adopted half the county's strays, both human and animal." They crested the hill, and the main house of the Triple Crown Ranch came into view. Emma stopped short, her breath catching at the sight spread before them. The house was magnificent without being ostentatious, a sprawling 2-story structure built from local stone and timber that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape. Wide porches wrapped around the building on multiple levels, their posts and railings carved with intricate patterns that spoke of craftsmanship and care, but it was the setting that truly took Emma's breath away. The house sat on a rise that commanded views of the entire ranch, from the cottonwood-lined creek they'd just left to the rolling pastures where horses and cattle grazed in peaceful coexistence. Gardens surrounded the house, not formal affairs, but naturalized plantings that attracted butterflies and birds. A large barn and several outbuildings completed the picture, everything maintained with the kind of attention that spoke of genuine pride and ownership. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered, shifting the babies to get a better look. "Like something from a dream." Jake felt a familiar surge of pride at her reaction. He'd been working the Triple Crown for over a decade, and he never got tired of that first glimpse of the main house rising from the Oklahoma plains like something from a better world. Mrs. Walsh says the land chose the house, not the other way around. Took her and Mr. Thomas 2 years to find exactly the right spot. As they approached the circular drive that led to the front porch, Emma felt her nervousness return. The house was obviously expensive, well-maintained, the home of someone with resources and education. What would such a person want with a homeless veterinary technician and her 3 babies? Even with Jake's reassurances and the miraculous scene at the chicken coop, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to be found wanting. The front door opened before they reached the porch steps, and a woman emerged who could only be Catherine Walsh. She was in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a clothes that managed to be both elegant and functional. Her face bore the lines of someone who'd lived fully, who'd known both joy and sorrow, but her eyes were bright with intelligence and curiosity. "Jake Bennett," she called, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone who'd been educated back east but had chosen to make her life in Oklahoma. "You're an hour late for the morning report, and that's not like you." Her gaze moved to Emma and the babies, taking in their bedraggled appearance and desperate circumstances with a single glance. "Mrs. Walsh," Jake replied, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that was as natural as breathing. "I found something at the old windmill that I thought you should see." Catherine Walsh's eyes sharpened with interest as she descended the porch steps, her attention focusing on Rusty, who had chosen that moment to poke his head up from Emma's shoulder and survey his new surroundings with bright curiosity. "Well," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of wonder that made Emma's heart skip with hope. "Isn't this interesting?" Catherine Walsh moved with the measured grace of someone accustomed to making quick assessments of both animals and people. Her eyes, a striking shade of green that reminded Emma of sage growing wild on the prairie, took in every detail of the unusual group standing in her circular drive. The crying babies, Emma's exhausted posture, the way Rusty perched protectively on the young mother's shoulder, all of it registered in the space of a heartbeat. "Jacob, help this young lady onto the porch before she falls over," Catherine said, her tone carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "And bring that little fox with them. I have a feeling this is going to be quite a story." Emma felt Jake's steadying hand on her elbow as they climbed the wide stone steps leading to the wraparound porch. Her legs trembled with each movement, the adrenaline that had carried her through the chicken coop encounter finally wearing off and leaving her feeling hollow and shaky. The babies sensed her distress and began crying in earnest, their small voices creating a chorus of need that echoed off the porch's high ceiling. "When did they last eat?" Catherine asked, her practiced eye taking in the signs of dehydration in both mother and children. "Yesterday morning," Emma admitted, her voice barely audible over the infant's cries. "Maybe the morning before. I've been trying to nurse them, but I haven't been able to produce much milk." Catherine's expression shifted from curiosity to immediate concern. "Jacob, go to the kitchen and tell Maria we need formula, bottles, and warm water immediately. Also have her heat some of that beef broth from yesterday and bring crackers." She turned back to Emma with the kind of focused attention that made the younger woman feel truly seen for the first time in months. "You're going to sit right here and let us take care of you while you tell me how you came to be sleeping under my windmill with 3 babies and a fox kit." The porch furniture was clearly expensive but chosen for comfort rather than show. Emma sank into a cushioned wicker chair that seemed to envelop her like a gentle embrace, while Rusty jumped down from her shoulder to explore this new environment. The kit moved with cautious curiosity, sniffing at the planters full of blooming flowers and investigating the corners where shadows provided hiding spots. Catherine settled into the chair opposite Emma, her movements deliberate and calming. "I'm Catherine Walsh, and I own this ranch along with about 15,000 acres of the prettiest grassland in Oklahoma. Jake tells me you passed our little character test with flying colors, which is no small feat. In 30 years of using that particular method of evaluation, I've seen maybe a dozen people earn that kind of acceptance from Henrietta and her girls." Emma managed a weak smile despite her exhaustion. "I'm Emma Rodriguez. These are Sophia, Miguel, and Anna." She gestured to each baby in turn, her voice gaining strength as she spoke their names. "And this is Rusty. We've been traveling together for about a week now." "From where?" "Tulsa. We had to leave after I lost my job and couldn't make rent. The shelter was full, and I couldn't find anyone willing to take on a single mother with triplets." Emma's voice remained steady, but Catherine could see the pain underlying the simple words. "I thought maybe if we could get to my sister in Arkansas, she might help us get back on our feet." Catherine nodded without judgment, her expression remaining neutral even as her mind processed the implications of Emma's situation. A woman walking from Tulsa to Arkansas with 3 infants was either desperate beyond measure or running from something more complicated than simple poverty. Either way, the immediate needs were the same. The screen door opened, and a middle-aged Latina woman emerged, carrying a tray laden with bottles, a can of formula, and a steaming bowl of soup. Her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her clothes spoke of someone who took pride in her work without needing to call attention to herself. "This is Maria Santos, my housekeeper and the heart of this operation," Catherine said warmly. "Maria, this is Emma Rodriguez and her children. They've had a rough journey." Maria's eyes immediately went to the crying babies, her maternal instincts overriding any questions about circumstances or propriety. "Ay, pobrecitos," she murmured, setting down the tray and immediately beginning to prepare the first bottle with practiced efficiency. "How old are they?" 4 months, Emma replied, accepting the first prepared bottle with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion and relief. Sophia latched onto it immediately, her cries stopping as she began to drink with desperate hunger. "All the same age?" Maria asked, already preparing the second bottle, while Catherine helped Emma position Miguel for feeding. "Triplets," Emma confirmed. "Born January 15th at St. Francis Hospital in Tulsa." Catherine raised an eyebrow at this information. Triplets were rare enough, but triplets born at a major hospital meant medical complications, extended stays, and enormous bills. Another piece of the puzzle that was Emma Rodriguez's circumstances clicked into place. As the babies settled into feeding, the adults had their first opportunity to really observe each other. Emma noted the way Catherine moved with quiet confidence, never hurried but somehow managing to convey urgency when needed. Maria bustled around them with the efficient care of someone who genuinely enjoyed taking care of people, while Jake stood quietly by the porch railing, his hat in his hands and his attention divided between the human drama and Rusty's exploration of the flower boxes. "Jacob says you have experience with animals," Catherine said once all three babies were drinking steadily. "What kind of work did you do in Tulsa?" "I was a veterinary technician at the Animal Medical Center downtown," Emma replied, feeling some of her professional pride return as she spoke about work she genuinely loved. "I specialized in emergency care and exotic animal treatment. Dr. Martinez said I had a natural instinct for reading animal behavior and stress signals." Catherine's interest sharpened noticeably. The Triple Crown Ranch employed several veterinarians on contract, but finding qualified technicians willing to work in rural Oklahoma was an ongoing challenge. "How long did you work there?" 3.5 years. "I started right after I finished my certification program at Tulsa Community College." Emma paused to burp Sophia before continuing. "I loved the work, especially the emergency cases where quick thinking could mean the difference between life and death for someone's beloved pet. What made you leave?" Emma's expression grew guarded, the openness fading as she remembered the series of events that had led to her current circumstances. "The pregnancy was complicated. I was on bed rest for the last 2 months, then the babies came early and spent 3 weeks in the NICU. By the time I was cleared to return to work, they needed constant care, and I couldn't find reliable childcare for 3 infants. Dr. Martinez held my position as long as he could, but eventually he had to hire someone who could actually show up consistently." Catherine nodded, understanding the impossible position Emma had found herself in. Quality childcare was expensive under the best of circumstances, and finding someone willing and able to care for triplets would have been nearly impossible on a veterinary technician's salary. "What about the baby's father? Is he in the picture?" The question Emma had been dreading finally came, and she felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack. She looked down at Miguel, who had finished his bottle and was gazing up at her with dark eyes that reminded her painfully of someone else. "David left when the doctors told us there were 3 babies instead of 1. Said he'd signed up for 1 child, not a whole litter, cleaned out our joint savings account and disappeared the night before they were born." The anger in Emma's voice was carefully controlled, but Catherine caught the underlying hurt that betrayed how deeply the abandonment had wounded her. Jake shifted uncomfortably by the railing, his jaw tightening at the casual cruelty Emma described. In his experience, men who walked away from their responsibilities were among the lowest forms of life. "I'm sorry," Catherine said simply, and Emma could hear genuine sympathy in her voice. "That must have been devastating, especially with everything else you were dealing with." "I thought I knew him," Emma whispered, her voice breaking slightly as she adjusted Anna's position for feeding. "We were together for 2 years, talked about marriage, about building a life together. When I got pregnant, he seemed excited about becoming a father. But when the ultrasound showed triplets, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly everything was too much, too expensive, too complicated." Maria made a soft sound of disgust, her opinion of men who abandoned pregnant women clear without needing to be voiced. She moved around the group, collecting empty bottles and checking that each baby was feeding properly, her presence providing a sense of stability that helped Emma continue her story. "After the babies were born and he still didn't come to the hospital, I knew he wasn't coming back. But I kept hoping, you know. I thought maybe when he saw them, when he realized how perfect they were, he'd change his mind." Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by a combination of old pain and new determination. "But hoping doesn't pay rent or buy diapers or formula. When the eviction notice came, I realized I was completely on my own." Catherine had heard variations of this story before, but rarely told with such honest emotion. Emma wasn't seeking pity or trying to manipulate sympathy. She was simply stating facts with the weary acceptance of someone who had learned that life rarely unfolded according to plan. It was exactly the kind of authentic response that Catherine looked for when evaluating whether someone deserved help or was simply skilled at playing on emotions. Rusty had apparently decided that the flower boxes held sufficient interest for the moment and trotted back to Emma's chair, climbing up her leg with the easy familiarity of a creature who considered her home. He settled in her lap beside Anna, his small body warm against the baby's side, and began grooming his russet fur with the meticulous attention of a cat. "Tell me about him," Catherine said, nodding toward the fox kit. Jacob mentioned you found him under unusual circumstances. Emma's expression softened as she looked down at Rusty, her hand automatically moving to stroke his fur in a gesture that had become second nature. 3 days into our walk, we were resting in a grove of trees near Broken Bow when I heard crying. Not human crying, but this heartbroken sound that seemed to come from the forest itself. I found him next to his mother's body on the highway. She'd been hit by a car, probably while trying to cross to reach food or water. She paused to adjust Sophia's position, the baby having fallen asleep mid-feeding with the deep exhaustion of the truly satisfied. He was so small, probably only a few days old, and he was trying to nurse from his dead mother. I couldn't just leave him there, even though I knew taking care of a wild animal was probably the last thing I should be adding to my problems. "What made you think you could care for him?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious about the decision-making process that had led to this unusual arrangement. "My training, mostly. We dealt with orphaned wildlife at the clinic sometimes, especially during baby season. I knew what fox kits needed to survive, and I had some basic supplies with me." Emma's voice took on the confident tone she'd used when discussing her professional background. The first challenge was getting him to take formula from a makeshift bottle, but once he started eating, he seemed to understand that I was trying to help him. Jake, who had been listening quietly from his position by the railing, finally spoke up. "What I can't get over is how he bonded with the babies. Most wild animals avoid human infants because they're so loud and unpredictable." Emma smiled, the expression transforming her tired features into something approaching beauty. "That's what amazed me, too. The first night after I found him, he was crying and restless, missing his mother's warmth. The babies were fussy because I was stressed and couldn't settle them properly. Finally, out of desperation, I put him in the middle of their makeshift bed. Within minutes, all 4 of them were asleep. He recognized them as babies in need of protection," Catherine observed, her respect for the unusual arrangement growing. "That level of interspecies empathy is rare, even in domesticated animals." "That's what Dr. Martinez always said about animal behavior," Emma agreed. "The capacity for empathy crosses species lines more often than people realize." Rusty seemed to understand instinctively that the babies were vulnerable and needed care, just like he did. Catherine rose from her chair and moved to the porch railing, gazing out over the vast expanse of the Triple Crown Ranch. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the last of the mist and revealing the full beauty of the Oklahoma landscape. In the distance, she could see her horses grazing peacefully in the home pasture, their coats gleaming in the golden light. "Emma," she said finally, turning back to face the young mother who sat surrounded by sleeping babies and a contented fox kit. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you running from anything besides poverty? Are there people looking for you? Legal troubles? Anything that might bring problems to my ranch?" Emma met Catherine's gaze directly, understanding that this was the moment of truth that would determine her family's future. "No," she said firmly. "I've never been in trouble with the law, never used drugs, never been involved in anything illegal. The only thing I'm running from is the failure to provide for my children. David took everything when he left, including my car, and without a job I couldn't maintain our apartment. But there's no one chasing us, no outstanding warrants or unpaid debts beyond normal living expenses." Catherine studied Emma's face with the intensity of someone who had learned to read truth in expressions and body language. After a long moment, she nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw. "Good. Because what I'm about to propose will require complete honesty and trust on both sides." Emma felt her heart begin to race as she sensed that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the Triple Crown Ranch has been looking for a qualified veterinary technician for the better part of 2 years, Catherine said, her voice taking on the business-like tone of someone making an important decision. "We run cattle, horses, sheep, chickens, and God knows what other creatures that my soft heart can't resist rescuing. Having someone on site with your training and experience would be invaluable." Emma stared at Catherine in disbelief, hardly daring to process what she was hearing. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a position, a place to live, and a chance to rebuild your life," Catherine corrected. "But it won't be easy, and it won't be temporary charity. If you accept, you'll be expected to work hard, learn fast, and earn your place here just like everyone else who calls the Triple Crown home." The offer was so far beyond Emma's hopes that she felt dizzy with the possibility of it. A job, a home, a chance to provide for her children in a place where they would be safe and cared for. It seemed too good to be true. "What about the babies?" she asked, her practical mind immediately jumping to the logistics that had made her previous employment impossible. "They still need constant care, and I can't afford childcare on any salary you could reasonably offer." Catherine smiled, the expression lighting up her features and revealing the generous spirit that had made the Triple Crown Ranch a refuge for so many over the years. "Emma, dear, you're thinking like someone who's been struggling alone for so long that you've forgotten how communities are supposed to work. Maria raised 4 children while working on this ranch, and she's been looking for an excuse to spoil some babies ever since her youngest grandchild grew out of the cuddling stage." Maria nodded enthusiastically, her eyes bright with the prospect of having infants to care for again. "I have been telling Mrs. Catherine for months that this house is too quiet without little ones. 3 babies would bring such joy to our days." "And Rusty?" Emma asked, looking down at the fox kit, who had apparently decided that Anna's tiny fist made an excellent pillow. "Rusty stays, obviously," Catherine replied as if the question were absurd. "Any creature that can earn Henrietta's approval and bond with 3 human babies has earned his place here. Besides, I have a feeling he's going to be invaluable as an educational tool for the wildlife rehabilitation work we do here." Emma felt tears begin to flow down her cheeks, the emotional weight of the morning finally overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. For months, she had carried the crushing burden of providing for her children with no support, no safety net, and no hope of circumstances improving. Now, in the space of a single conversation, all of that had changed. "I don't understand," she whispered through her tears. "Why would you do this for a stranger? You don't know anything about me except what I've told you in the last hour." Catherine returned to her chair and leaned forward, her expression serious but kind. "Emma, I've learned over the years that character reveals itself in unexpected ways. The fact that you rescued Rusty when you were already overwhelmed shows compassion. The way you've cared for him and your children despite impossible circumstances shows determination. But most importantly, the way that Fox Kit trusts you and the way he's bonded with your babies tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." She paused, her gaze moving to the sleeping infants who lay peaceful and content for the first time in weeks. "Animals don't lie, Emma. They can't fake affection or manipulate emotions the way humans can. Rusty chose to stay with you when every instinct should have told him to run. That's not luck or coincidence. That's recognition of something genuine and trustworthy in your nature." Jake, who had been listening to the conversation with growing amazement, finally stepped forward. "Mrs. Walsh, are you sure about this? I mean, I think it's a wonderful idea, but taking on a woman with 3 babies and a fox is a pretty big commitment." Catherine stood and moved to the porch railing again, her hands gripping the painted wood as she considered Jake's reasonable concern. "Jacob, do you remember what this ranch was like when I inherited it from Thomas? The buildings falling apart, the financial records in shambles, half the staff ready to quit because they hadn't been paid regularly in months?" Jake nodded, remembering the chaos that had greeted Catherine when she'd arrived from Boston to settle her late husband's estate. The Triple Crown had been one of the most successful ranches in eastern Oklahoma under Thomas Walsh's management, but his final illness had left everything in disarray. "I was a city woman who knew nothing about ranching, nothing about cattle or horses or the land," Catherine continued. "Every logical person told me to sell the place and go back to my comfortable life in Massachusetts. But I looked at this land, and I saw something worth fighting for. More importantly, I saw people like you and Maria who had invested their hearts in this place and deserved better than to watch it fall apart." She turned back to Emma, her expression resolute. "That's what I see when I look at you and your children, Emma. People worth fighting for. People who deserve a chance to build something meaningful. The fact that you've already proven you're willing to sacrifice for others, even a wild fox kit that most people would have ignored, tells me you understand what real commitment means." Emma wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. "What would you expect from me? I mean, specifically, what would my duties be?" "Initially, basic veterinary support for our livestock and the wildlife rehabilitation program we run in partnership with the state," Catherine replied, settling back into her chair with the air of someone who had made up her mind and was now focused on implementation. Vaccinations, health checks, emergency care, until we can get a full veterinarian on site. As you get more familiar with the operation, we can expand your responsibilities based on your interests and our needs. What about housing? Living arrangements? Catherine gestured toward the main house with obvious pride. This place has 8 bedrooms, most of which haven't been used since Thomas died. You and the children would have your own wing, essentially bedroom, nursery, sitting room, and private bathroom. Complete privacy when you need it, but close enough to the main areas that Maria can help with childcare when you're working. The scope of the offer was breathtaking. Emma had been hoping for basic survival, food, shelter, safety for her children. Instead, Catherine was proposing a complete life rebuild with opportunities for professional growth and personal stability that exceeded her most optimistic dreams. There has to be a catch, Emma said finally, her tone more bewildered than suspicious. People don't just offer struggling strangers everything they need to rebuild their lives. What aren't you telling me? Catherine laughed, the sound genuine and warm. The catch, as you put it, is that this won't be charity. You'll earn every bit of what you receive through hard work and dedication. Ranch life starts before dawn and doesn't end until the animals are settled for the night. The work is physically demanding, sometimes dangerous, and always unpredictable. If you're expecting a quiet life where your biggest worry is keeping the babies entertained, this isn't the right place for you. Emma looked down at her children, who continued to sleep peacefully despite the life-changing conversation happening around them. Sophia's tiny fist was wrapped around one of Rusty's paws, while Miguel and Anna slept pressed against each other in the way that spoke of months spent sharing cramped spaces. They deserved better than the uncertainty and danger they'd known since leaving Tulsa. "When would you need an answer?" Emma asked. "I need an answer now," Catherine replied firmly. "Not because I'm trying to pressure you, but because those babies need medical attention, proper nutrition, and a stable environment immediately. If you're going to accept, we need to get started on the practical arrangements today. If you're going to decline, I'll drive you into Millfield myself and help you connect with social services." Emma felt the weight of decisions settling on her shoulders like a physical presence. Everything rational told her that accepting Catherine's offer was the obvious choice. It provided everything she needed for herself and her children while offering opportunities for growth and stability. But the part of her that had been hurt by trusting the wrong person whispered warnings about situations that seemed too good to be true. Rusty chose that moment to stretch and resettle himself more comfortably in Emma's lap, his small body warm and trusting against her stomach. His amber eyes opened briefly, meeting hers with the kind of simple acceptance that cut through all her complicated human fears and doubts. "Yes," Emma said quietly, the word carrying all the hope and terror of someone stepping into an unknown future. "Yes, we'll stay. All of us." Catherine's smile was brilliant, transforming her dignified features into something approaching girlish delight. "Wonderful. Maria, would you mind showing Emma and the children to the blue guest suite? We'll convert one of the adjoining rooms into a proper nursery over the next few days, but for now they'll need somewhere comfortable to rest." "Of course," Maria replied, already moving to help Emma gather the babies. "Come, Mira, let's get ya." And these little ones settled properly. As Emma rose from her chair, still somewhat stunned by the rapid turn her life had taken, Catherine caught her arm gently. "Emma, I want you to understand something. This arrangement will work only if we're honest with each other about expectations and limitations. If problems arise, if the work becomes too much with 3 infants to care for, if you decide ranch life isn't what you want for your family, I need you to tell me directly rather than simply disappearing one morning." Emma met Catherine's gaze steadily, understanding the older woman's need for reassurance. "Mrs. Walsh, I've spent the last 4 months learning what it means to have nowhere to turn and no one to depend on. If you're willing to give us this chance, I promise you won't find me ungrateful or unreliable." "Call me Catherine," the ranch owner replied warmly, "and I believe you. Now go get some rest. Tomorrow we'll start showing you around the operation and getting you familiar with our animals and routines." As Emma followed Maria into the house, Rusty riding contentedly on her shoulder while she carried the sleeping babies, Jake remained on the porch with Catherine. The two of them stood in comfortable silence, watching the unusual procession disappear through the front door. "Think we just made the right decision?" Jake asked finally. Catherine continued gazing out over her ranch, taking in the peaceful scene of horses grazing in morning sunlight and cattle moving slowly across distant pastures. Jacob, in all my years of ranching, I've learned that the best decisions often feel like leaps of faith. That young woman walked across Oklahoma with 3 babies and a fox kit because she refused to give up on providing for her family. That kind of determination isn't something you can teach. It's something you recognize and support when you're lucky enough to encounter it. And if it doesn't work out, then we'll deal with whatever problems arise and help her find a better situation, Catherine replied pragmatically. But I have a feeling that Emma Rodriguez is exactly what this ranch has been missing. Sometimes the best things come in the most unexpected packages. As if to underscore her point, the sound of babies crying drifted from the house, followed by Maria's cheerful voice singing a Spanish lullaby. The sounds of life and activity filled spaces that had been quiet for too long, bringing a sense of purpose and vitality that Catherine hadn't realized she'd been missing. "Well," Jake said, settling his hat back on his head and preparing to resume his morning duties, "I guess we're about to find out just how much excitement 3 babies and a fox can bring to ranch life." Catherine laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie like a promise of better days ahead. "Jacob, I have a feeling we haven't seen anything yet." 6 months had transformed everything about Emma's world. The desperate woman who once slept beneath a windmill with 3 crying babies had evolved into someone she barely recognized. Her hands, once soft from office work, now bore the calluses of ranch labor. Her shoulders had broadened from lifting hay bales and wrestling with stubborn cattle. Most importantly, the haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by something she'd almost forgotten existed: genuine contentment. The Blue Guest Suite had become a proper family home, with the adjoining room converted into a nursery that rivaled anything found in the finest houses. Sophia, Miguel, and Anna were thriving beyond all expectations, their chubby cheeks and bright eyes testament to consistent care and abundant love. They had learned to crawl in formation across the hardwood floors, often following Rusty, who had appointed himself their official guide and protector. The fox kit had grown into a magnificent young fox, his coat now thick and lustrous, his amber eyes bright with intelligence. He remained devoted to the triplets, sleeping curled between their cribs each night and alerting the adults whenever one of them needed attention. The veterinarians who visited the ranch regularly declared him the most remarkable case of interspecies bonding they'd ever documented. Emma stood in the main barn's medical facility, a converted stall that now housed thousands of dollars worth of veterinary equipment. She was examining a mare's injured leg while the horse stood calmly, seemingly aware that this human meant no harm. The facility had been Catherine's investment in Emma's expertise, recognizing that having a qualified technician on site would save both money and animal lives. "How's Lady looking?" Jake asked, entering the barn with his usual quiet efficiency. The relationship between him and Emma had evolved into something comfortable and professional, built on mutual respect and shared dedication to the ranch's welfare. "The infection's clearing nicely," Emma replied, carefully rewrapping the bandage. "She should be back to full mobility within the week, but I want to keep monitoring the healing progress daily." Jake nodded, his weathered face showing the relief he felt whenever one of their animals recovered from injury. "Catherine's in the house if you need to give her an update. She's been worried about Lady since the accident." Emma finished securing the bandage and gave the mare a gentle pat before heading toward the main house. The walk across the ranch yard had become as familiar as breathing, each building and landmark now part of her daily reality. The chicken coop where Rusty had first proven his gentle nature remained a favorite destination for the babies, who delighted in watching Henrietta and her flock from the safety of their stroller. She found Catherine in the kitchen, sharing afternoon coffee with Maria while reviewing the ranch's financial records. The ledgers that had once seemed impossibly complex to Emma now made perfect sense, another skill she'd developed during her months at the Triple Crown. "Lady's responding well to treatment," Emma reported. Accepting the cup of coffee Maria automatically poured for her. "The swelling's down significantly, and there's no sign of recurring infection." "Excellent news," Catherine replied, making a note in her daily planner. "Dr. Henderson mentioned during his last visit that you've handled more complex cases in 6 months than most technicians see in 2 years. He was particularly impressed with your work on that injured coyote pup." Emma felt the familiar warmth of professional recognition. The wildlife rehabilitation aspect of her work had become her greatest passion, allowing her to use skills she'd never fully developed at the Tulsa clinic. Speaking of wildlife cases, I wanted to discuss expanding the rehabilitation facility. We're getting more calls from the State Wildlife Department than our current setup can handle. What did you have in mind? Converting the old equipment shed into a proper wildlife hospital. We'd need isolation units for different species, surgical facilities for more complex procedures, and expanded quarantine areas. Emma pulled out a carefully prepared proposal, complete with cost estimates and projected benefits. The initial investment would be substantial, but the state grants available for certified wildlife rehabilitation would offset most expenses within 2 years. Catherine studied the proposal with the focused attention she gave all ranch business decisions. This would essentially make you the primary wildlife veterinarian for 3 counties. With Dr. Henderson's oversight and consultation, yes. It would also create opportunities for educational programs, school visits, and public awareness initiatives about wildlife conservation. Jake, who had joined them during the discussion, looked up from his own paperwork. Tourism potential, too. Folks love seeing wildlife rehabilitation in action, especially families with children. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of happy babbling from the nursery monitor. Emma smiled, recognizing the particular combination of sounds that meant the triplets were waking from their afternoon nap. I should get them before they wake each other completely. Take your time, Maria said warmly. I'll start preparing their afternoon bottles. Emma climbed the stairs to the nursery, her heart swelling with gratitude, as it did every day when she entered the room that housed her children. Sophia was sitting up in her crib, chattering animatedly to Rusty, who perched on the railing between her and Miguel's bed. Anna remained asleep, but her siblings' increasing volume would soon remedy that situation. "Hello, my darlings," Emma whispered, lifting Sophia into her arms while Rusty jumped down to check on the other babies. "Did you have good dreams?" The next hour passed in the familiar rhythm of feeding, changing, and playing that had become the most precious part of Emma's day. The babies were developing distinct personalities: Sophia the adventurous explorer, Miguel the contemplative observer, Anna the social butterfly who charmed everyone she met. They recognized the various adults in their lives now, reaching eagerly for Catherine's gentle hands, gurgling with delight when Jake sang his off-key cowboy songs, and settling immediately when Maria spoke to them in lilting Spanish. As evening approached, Emma found herself on the front porch where her journey at the Triple Crown had begun. The babies were settled in their portable playpen, entertaining themselves with soft toys, while Rusty supervised from his favorite perch on the porch railing. Catherine joined her, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose day had been productive. "I've been thinking about your expansion proposal," Catherine said, settling into her usual chair. "The numbers make sense, and God knows we could use the additional revenue streams. But more importantly, it would establish this ranch as a leader in wildlife conservation efforts." Emma felt excitement building in her chest. "You're considering approving it?" "I'm considering making it our primary development focus for next year. The Triple Crown has always been about more than cattle and horses. It's about being good stewards of the land and everything that lives on it." Catherine gestured toward the vast expanse of prairie that stretched beyond the ranch buildings. "Your work with Rusty and the other wildlife cases has reminded me that we have a responsibility to protect creatures that can't speak for themselves." The conversation was interrupted by the distinctive sound of a vehicle approaching on the gravel drive. A familiar pickup truck emerged from behind a cottonwood grove, and Emma's breath caught as she recognized the driver. Dr. Martinez, her former supervisor from the Tulsa clinic, stepped out of the vehicle with a slightly bewildered expression of someone who had driven farther into rural Oklahoma than he'd ever expected. "Dr. Martinez," Emma called, rising from her chair with surprise and genuine pleasure. "What brings you all the way out here?" The veterinarian approached the porch, his eyes taking in the scene of domestic tranquility with obvious amazement. "Emma Rodriguez, you look like a completely different person. When I heard you disappeared from Tulsa with the babies, I feared the worst." "How did you find me?" "Professional networking," he replied with a slight smile. "Dr. Henderson mentioned during a conference that he was consulting with a ranch that employed a remarkably skilled technician named Emma Rodriguez. When he described your background and mentioned triplets, I knew it had to be you." Catherine stood, extending her hand with characteristic grace. "I'm Catherine Walsh, owner of the Triple Crown Ranch. You must be Dr. Martinez. Emma speaks of you often, and always with great respect." "The pleasure is mine," Dr. Martinez replied, accepting the handshake while his eyes moved to the babies who were watching this new arrival with curious interest. "I have to say, when Emma left Tulsa, I never imagined I'd find her thriving on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. Emma has become indispensable to our operation," Catherine said warmly. "Her skills have elevated our animal care standards beyond anything we thought possible for a ranch our size." Dr. Martinez spent the next hour touring the ranch's veterinary facilities, his professional admiration growing with each piece of equipment and each case file Emma showed him. His questions were sharp and informed, pushing Emma to explain her treatment decisions and diagnostic processes in ways that reminded her why she'd enjoyed working with him. "I came here expecting to offer you your old job back," he admitted as they concluded the tour. "The clinic has been struggling without your expertise, and I finally convinced the partners that we could accommodate flexible scheduling for your family situation." Emma felt a flutter of her old anxiety, the fear that circumstances beyond her control might force another unwanted life change. "Dr. Martinez, I'm honored that you'd consider rehiring me, but this ranch has become our home. The babies are thriving here, and I've found work that challenges me in ways I never expected." "I can see that," he replied, his tone carrying genuine respect rather than disappointment. "What you've built here is impressive, Emma. The wildlife rehabilitation program alone represents the kind of comprehensive care that most urban clinics struggle to provide." As the sun began to set over the Oklahoma prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reminded Emma of her first morning at the Windmill, Dr. Martinez prepared to leave. His visit had served as a powerful reminder of how dramatically her life had changed, but more importantly, it had confirmed that the changes were exactly what she and her children needed. "Emma," he said before climbing back into his truck, "if you ever decide ranch life isn't for you, there will always be a place for you at the clinic. But based on what I've seen today, I think you've found something special here." After his departure, Emma remained on the porch with Catherine, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The babies had fallen asleep in their playpen, exhausted by the excitement of meeting a new person. Rusty curled up beside them, his presence a constant reminder of the journey that had brought them all together. "Any regrets?" Catherine asked quietly. Emma considered the question, thinking about the desperate woman who had once slept beneath a windmill with no hope and no future. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone she'd once known but had grown beyond. The babies who had once cried from hunger now slept peacefully, surrounded by love and security. The fox kit, who had once been a wild creature clinging to life, now served as guardian and companion to 3 human children. "None," Emma replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had found her place in the world. "This ranch saved us, but more than that, it gave us the chance to become who we were meant to be." As if in response to her words, Rusty opened one amber eye and chittered softly, a sound that had become as familiar and comforting as a lullaby. In the distance, cattle settled for the night while horses moved like shadows across moonlit pastures. The windmill that had once sheltered a desperate family now stood as a landmark of transformation, its weathered blades turning steadily in the prairie wind. Emma Rodriguez had found her forever home, and the Triple Crown Ranch had found its heart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.